So for those of you who don't know, I'm Kate and I'm with the York Buddhist group with Shaki Badar and Mark, who you'll meet later in the week. And we're just gathering today, this morning, for our morning Cuppa meditation, which I know quite a lot of you are doing every day, which is fantastic. And it's really great to have you here. So we're just going to sit together, find somewhere comfortable, have a drink. And we're just going to take a pause. We're just going to stop and just sit together, which sounds quite simple, but it can actually be quite challenging. And even just the words can have quite an effect if we just use those words pause or stop or just sit and just allow them to kind of percolate and permeate your being. They have quite an effect, or certainly they have quite an effect on me. I tend to be quite busy, quite stimulate my mind more often than not, partly because I feel I need to be useful. Partly because I think there's always something that I need to be doing. There's always plenty to be doing. So I don't often give myself the time to just stop or pause, um, which I think is quite common for a lot of people. Like we don't almost give ourselves permission to stop. And we should. And it can also be quite a welcome distraction to keep quite busy. I can ignore anything that's feeling quite uncomfortable. Any sense of difficulty or vulnerability or tenderness, which I think is pretty common too. So often, if I keep myself busy, I can ignore that that's going on, which I can fool myself into thinking that that's somehow easier. But it's not, and it's certainly not wiser. So we're just going to come together this morning and support each other in, for what me at least is quite challenging, to just stop, to take a pause, and just to sit, and to sit with a drink. And I'm not going to look at my phone, and I'm not going to pick up a book. I'm not going to look at my diary and see what I could be planning. We're just going to sit together. And in doing so, we become quite aware of our habits, whether that's wanting to do something, or our habits of mind, what thoughts arise, because they can often have quite a repetitive pattern or quite a habitual nature. So we can become quite aware of that. So we'll take this 15 minutes together to just sit and just become aware of what we're sitting with together. Some of which will be different for each one of us, and some of which are quite a lot of, will be quite have some kind of similarity amongst us. So we can first become aware of the body and any sense of contact with what we're sitting on, or any contact with the ground with our feet. And we can just take a moment to just come into that sense of contact and that sense of connection with the ground. And the ground we can think of has qualities of stillness and stability and a sense of support. So we can almost imaginatively connect with that for ourselves. We often use those phrases, don't we, about feeling held with people or feeling supported with people. But in just taking 15 minutes just with ourselves, we can begin to have that connection with the contact with the ground and imaginatively arrive in those qualities ourselves. So use the contact with the ground to just feel a sense of stability, support, and stillness within ourselves. And that we don't need to do anything, or we don't need anybody. We can just kind of connect in with those qualities. And in doing so, we can begin to start feeling quite held and quite safe and quite supported just in taking a pause. And then just moving from that sense of contact with our feet with the ground, or where we're sitting, depending on how we're sitting, we can then just begin to give up the kind of lower weight of the heart, lower half of your body. Just give up the weight to the ground. I mean, we will be sitting on something that we're giving up our weight to a certain extent. But there's usually a sense of kind of holding. So we can just keep trying to arrive in our bodies and just keep letting go of that weight as we're just taking time to just sit. Just keep arriving in our bodies and having a sense of just really letting go. Just allowing wherever you sat to just really hold you. And just being aware of your back. And just if your back's feeling quite supported, in your lower back, in the middle of your back, your shoulders. We can hold a lot of tension in our backs and our shoulders and our necks. And just bringing a sense of awareness to that, of how that's feeling for you today. So as we just sat here, we can just bring our attention to different areas of our body, just becoming more aware of how we are. Bringing our attention to our belly. We can often hold our belly, but can we just really let it go and relax? So just moving your attention around to different parts of your body and just notice what's there. Or maybe notice what feels quite dominant, what's kind of almost asking for your attention as you've chosen to pause. Something will be kind of asking for your attention. Some kind of tightening or contraction. Or maybe even if there's just a sense of pleasure in the body, if you're feeling quite relaxed right now, then just turn your attention to any pleasure. And then we can bring in the breath. So we can just notice we're taking quite long or quite short breaths. We're breathing quite fast, quite slow. Is our breath only kind of reaching our chest area, or is it longer? Does it have more depth? Are we breathing into the belly? And that can both kind of give us a bit of a sense of awareness of how we are, but we can also use that breath as an anchor. So if we're going off and getting distracted or thinking, oh, I should really go and do this, or we can just kind of return to the breath as an anchor. And then we can bring in both the body and the breath together. So we can just be aware of the breath and just be aware of the body, and how does the body feel in relation to the breath, and where can we feel the breath in the body? And can we use the breath to just keep relaxing down and just letting go? You might want to take a few deeper breaths just to kind of signal to yourself and your body that you're just taking this time to pause. And as you're doing that, you might notice any sounds. I can hear birdsong faintly outside. Just noticing if I turn my attention to it. Often I can't hear it at all because I'll be quite distracted or quite absorbed in what I'm doing. And then we can turn our attention to our emotions and how are we feeling. And you might want to just kind of drop into your heart center or your chest, which is often where we hold our emotions, or just even have a sense of touch, just to kind of check in with how you're feeling. You can just be quite kind with that if it's difficult this morning. And again, we can just use the breath into breathing into that kind of chest and heart center, just breathing with whatever emotions are there. And if they're quite difficult or quite tender, then just taking this time to pause is a sense, having a sense of that you're taking care of yourself and that you're giving yourself permission to just pause and be with what's there. And if there's a sense of joy or gratitude, sense of pleasure, you're also giving yourself permission to feel that too. So we've got a sense of joy with what's there that's pleasant in our experience, and a sense of kindness for anything that's quite difficult or tender. And then the trickier one is we can be aware of our thoughts arising. And I say trickier, perhaps just trickier for me, although I think it is for quite a lot of people, that we have quite habitual thoughts or habitual stories, stories we might rerun, stories or thoughts, thought patterns, things that ideas that might be kind of unresolved. And we have that phrase, don't we, of a thought train. We can jump on the thought train, um, and we can go to what is quite an initial thought that we could have allowed to pass by, and suddenly we got quite caught, quite attached, which can often be quite unpleasant, quite painful, certainly quite unhelpful. So I like to think of my thoughts as like blowing bubbles, like what you would do with a child. And essentially, the thoughts are arising all of the time, and they're different in size and different in colours. And some are quite enchanting and quite compelling. Some are quite gripping in both pleasant and unpleasant ways. But can I just arise and let them move on and pop like bubbles that have been blown rather than attaching onto them? We can give a lot of weight and a lot of validity to our thoughts. We can often believe them, but they're not necessarily true. So we can become quite aware of our thought patterns. and just take a step back and just kind of unhook from that kind of narrative. And then just for the last couple of minutes, we can just kind of broaden that attention or that awareness so that we're aware of all the 5 different areas that I've mentioned. So we can be aware of what's happening in our bodies, aware of what's happening in our emotions, our thoughts, aware of our breath and any sounds, and just kind of widening out that attention, just so that they're all included as we're just sat, just having a drink. And when you're doing this, if at any point anything becomes quite challenging or quite intense that you don't want to sit with, you can kind of widen out your attention even further. So you can just kind of take a look around the room, um, look at a plant, look out the window, and just kind of experiment with that proximity of bringing your attention in quite close, quite intense, quite intimate with your experience, and then moving it out if that becomes too challenging. And you can experiment with that proximity with yourself and a wider perspective so that you can begin to kind of have more helpful habits. So, on the subject of thoughts, I'm just going to finish with a reading by Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, which is really helpful for me, of just unhooking and unattaching from certainly unhelpful thoughts or thoughts that are not necessarily even true. So, like waves, all the activities of this life have rolled endlessly on, one after the other. Yet they have left us feeling empty-handed. Myriads of thoughts have run through our mind, and each one giving birth to many more. But what they have done is to increase our confusion and dissatisfaction. When we closely examine the ordinary habits that underlie what we do and try to discover where they come from, we find that their very source is our failure to investigate them properly. We operate under the deluded assumption that everything has some sort of true substantial reality. But when we look more carefully, we find that the phenomenal world is like a rainbow, vivid, colourful, but without any tangible existence. So when a rainbow appears in the sky, we see many beautiful colours. Yet a rainbow is not something we can clothe ourselves with or wear as an ornament. And there is nothing we can take hold of. It's simply something that appears to us through the conjunction of various conditions. Thoughts arise in the mind in just the same way. They have no tangible reality, no intrinsic existence at all, and therefore there's no logical reason why thoughts should have such power over us, nor any reason why we should be enslaved by them. So the mind creates samsara and nirvana, and yet there is nothing much to it. It's just thoughts. And once we recognize that thoughts are just empty, the mind will no longer have that power to deceive us. But as long as we take our thoughts as real, we will continue to torment us mercilessly, as they've been doing throughout countless past lives. So to cut through this mind's clinging, it's important to understand that all these appearances are void, appearance of water in a mirage, and beautiful thoughts are of no benefit to the mind, nor any ugly forms can harm it in any way. So sever the ties of hope and fear, attraction and repulsion, and remain in equanimity, in the understanding that all phenomena are nothing more than projections of your own mind. And once you've realized this absolute truth, then you will see the whole infinitive display of relative phenomena that appears within it as no more than an illusion or a dream. To realize that appearance and voidness are one, and what is called simplicity or freedom from such conceptual limitations. So thank you for joining me this morning in just taking a pause. And really don't underestimate taking 15 minutes taking a pause, and actually being here together and the support of each other. It's quite powerful. So thank you. It's been a pleasure. Go gently into the rest of your day.